The rain on Verith Prime smelled like copper and burned leaves. And Dr. Mira Vance had learned to love it in the 7 months since her arrival at Forward Research Camp Theta 7. She stood at the edge of the camp perimeter now, watching the alien forest shift and breathe in the purple twilight, when she heard the sound that would change everything, a high, thin cry coming from somewhere beyond the sensor fence. "Ignore it," said Counselor Vorath through her earpiece, his droll voice wet and gurgling as always. "The forest is full of dying things, and none of them are your concern." But Myra was already moving. She found the cub in a shallow ravine about 30 meters past the fence line, its 6 limbs tangled in the roots of a massive fungal tree. One of its hind legs bent at an angle that made her stomach turn. A Varati cub, one of the apex predators that made this planet so dangerous. The reason the research team carried weapons at all times. The reason the Galactic Union had classified Verith Prime as a high-risk assignment. The cub was young, maybe 2 months old by Earth standards. Its fur, a deep charcoal gray with bioluminescent stripes that pulsed weakly along its spine. Even injured and terrified, it was beautiful when Mira approached. It raised its head and hissed, revealing rows of teeth designed for tearing flesh. And the venomous spines along its back rose in warning. "Easy," Myra said softly, kneeling in the mud. "Easy now. Little one, I am not going to hurt you." The cub watched her with 6 eyes that glowed like dying embers in the fading light. Protocol was clear. Wild Varati were to be killed on sight if they approached the camp, and injured ones were to be euthanized to prevent them from attracting scavengers. Mira knew the rules because she had helped write them. She picked up the cub anyway. Bit her. Of course it did, sinking those needle teeth into her forearm hard enough to draw blood. But then something strange happened. It stopped, sniffed her wound, and went limp in her arms, as if it had decided that this strange 2-legged creature was not worth the effort of fighting. "You are going to be trouble," Myra told it. And she could have sworn the cub understood back at camp. The reaction was exactly what she expected. "You brought a predator into our living space," shrieked Kiveth, the lead Kivari researcher, her antennae vibrating with distress. "Have you lost your cognitive function entirely?" "Its leg is broken," Mira said calmly, carrying the cub into her hab unit. "I am going to set it and then decide what to do." What to do is obvious. Counselor Vorath had emerged from the water tank where he spent most of his off hours, his amphibious skin glistening. Galactic Union Protocol 773 clearly states. "I know what it states," Myra interrupted, and something in her voice made the Drell take a step back. "I wrote the xenobiology section myself. And right now I am invoking my authority as Chief Medical Officer to quarantine this specimen for study." It was a lie, or at least a stretch of the truth so thin it was nearly transparent. But the other species had learned something about humans in the months they had worked together. When a human used that tone of voice, arguing was rarely productive. The cub-stable Myra named it Ember, because of the way its bioluminescent markings glowed like coals when it was calm. And over the following days, she learned things about the Varati that no xenobiologist had ever documented. The species was smarter than anyone had realized, not sentient. Not quite, but possessing a kind of emotional intelligence that bordered on uncanny. Ember learned to recognize Myra's footsteps within a week. And by the 2nd week it would come when she called its name. The other researchers watched this development with a mixture of horror and fascination. "Humans did this before," Kiva said one evening, her compound eyes fixed on Mira as she fed Ember strips of synthetic protein. "On your homeworld, you took predators and made them into companions, wolves into dogs, wild cats into housepets. It is in your historical records." "We did," Mira agreed. "Why?" The Kivari's voice held genuine confusion. Why would any species deliberately bond with creatures capable of killing them? Myra considered the question as Ember pressed its massive head against her palm, rumbling with something that sounded almost like a purr. "Because we were lonely," she said finally. "Because we looked at the dangerous things in our world and saw potential friends instead of threats, and because sometimes the most loyal companions are the ones who chose not to kill you when they easily could have." Kiveth made a clicking sound that indicated deep discomfort and walked away. 3 weeks passed, and Ember grew stronger. Its leg healed crookedly, leaving it with a permanent limp, but it compensated with surprising grace. It followed Myra everywhere now, sleeping outside her HAB unit door at night, accompanying her on sample collection trips during the day. The variety pack that had abandoned it never returned, and Myra suspected she knew why. In the wild, a lame cub was a liability, a drain on resources, something to be left behind for the good of the group. Humans did not think that way. Humans carried their wounded, fed their weak, and fought for those who could not fight for themselves. It was inefficient by galactic standards, sentimental and illogical, but it was also the reason humanity had spread across 300 worlds in less than 4 centuries. "You are part of my pack now," Myra told Ember one night, scratching behind its ears as the alien moons rose over the forest. "And I do not abandon my pack." Ember's stripes pulsed warm orange, and it pressed closer to her side. Neither of them knew that in 72 hours, those words would be tested in ways Myra could never have imagined. That death was coming to Camp Theta 7 on silent engines, and that the bond between a human and her impossible pet would be the only thing standing between survival and slaughter for now. They simply sat together in the copper-scented darkness, 2 outcasts from different worlds, and watched the stars wheel overhead. The forest breathed around them, full of hidden dangers, but Myra Vance was not afraid. She had never learned how to be. Myra woke to pressure on her chest and the smell of Ember's breath, hot and sharp like iron filings. Her eyes opened to darkness, and for a moment she did not understand what was happening. The cub had never entered her HAB unit before, had always waited patiently outside the door. So why was it here now? Its massive forepaw pressed against her sternum, its 6 eyes blazing like warning lights in the black. "Ember?" she whispered. "What is wrong?" The cub made a sound she had never heard before, a low subsonic rumble that she felt more than heard, vibrating through her ribs and into her spine. Its bioluminescent stripes were flashing in rapid patterns, not the calm orange of contentment or the soft blue of sleep, but harsh red pulses that seemed to scream danger in a language older than words. Myra's hand found her sidearm before her conscious mind caught up with her instincts. She had been a Marine before she became a scientist, had served 2 tours in the Outer Rim conflicts before deciding she would rather study alien life than end it. Those skills had grown rusty in the years since, buried under research papers and grant proposals, but they had never truly disappeared. "Show me," she said to the cub. Rising from her bed, Ember moved to the window, pressing its nose against the reinforced glass, and Myra followed outside. Camp Theta 7 lay peaceful under the light of Varith Prime's 3 moons. She could see the research modules arranged in their careful semicircle, the communications tower rising like a silver needle against the stars, the supply depot where they stored everything from food to weapons to emergency medical supplies. Nothing moved except the alien trees swaying in the night wind, but Ember was trembling now, its whole body shaking with tension, and those red stripes were flashing faster and faster. The cub turned its head toward the northern tree line and let out a sound that raised every hair on Myra's body. Not a howl, not a growl, but something between the two. Ancient and terrible Myra trusted her own senses, but she trusted Ember more. She hit the camp-wide alarm. The response was immediate and furious. Counselor Varith's voice exploded through her comm unit, thick with sleep and outrage. "Human, What is the meaning of this disruption? Our sensors show no threats, and I was in the middle of my rest cycle. Something is coming, Mira said. Pulling on her boots and checking her weapon, Ember woke me, and I have never seen it act like this before. You activated a full emergency alert because your pet was restless? The Drell's voice dripped with contempt. This is exactly the kind of irrational behavior that makes other species question human judgment. The first plasma bolt struck the communications tower. Explosion lit up the night in a cascade of blue and white fire, and Mira felt the shockwave even inside her HAB unit. Alarms that had seemed annoying seconds ago now screamed with desperate urgency. And through the window she saw figures emerging from the northern tree line, dozens of them, moving with military precision, their armor glinting in the moonlight. Contact! Mira shouted into the comm. Armed hostiles approaching from the north, all personnel to defensive positions immediately. But she knew even as she spoke that the order was meaningless. Camp Theta 7 was a research station, not a military outpost. And its personnel had been selected for their scientific expertise rather than their combat skills. The Kivari researchers would freeze. She had seen it happen during a minor emergency 2 months ago. Their species' threat response locking them in place like statues. The Drell would scatter toward water, driven by instincts that prioritize submersion over strategy. And the handful of human support staff were technicians and administrators. Not soldiers. Mira was the only one here who had ever been trained to fight. She moved fast, years of muscle memory taking over as her conscious mind raced to assess the situation. The attackers were using standard raider tactics, striking the communications first to prevent distress calls, which meant they wanted prisoners rather than body slavers, most likely. Targeting the isolated research station for its valuable personnel that gave her time. But not much. She burst out of her HAB unit with Ember at her heels and found chaos already spreading through the camp. Kavith stood frozen in the doorway of the main research module, her compound eyes wide and unseeing, while 2 other Kivari researchers had collapsed into the same paralyzed state nearby. Myra grabbed Kavith by the arm and dragged her toward her own HAB unit, shouting at Ember, "Guard them! Do not let anyone in." The cub stationed itself at the door, its spines raised, its teeth bared. Looking every inch the apex predator, it was Myra sprinted toward the frozen Kivari, hauled them up one at a time, and half-carried them to safety. She was dimly aware of plasma bolts sizzling past her, of shouting voices in a language she did not recognize, of the growing roar of engines as more hostile ships descended from the clouds by the time she sealed the HAB unit door. Her arms were shaking and her breath was coming in ragged gasps. "What is happening?" Kavith asked, her voice small and strange, her paralysis finally breaking. "What are those creatures?" "Raiders," Myra said, checking her weapon's charge. "Slavers. Probably Kethver, based on their armor configuration. They hit isolated stations like ours and take researchers for ransom or sale. Then we must hide," the Kivari said. "We must find somewhere to conceal ourselves until—" "No." Myra's voice was flat and hard. "Hiding will not save us. They have thermal sensors, motion trackers, and enough firepower to crack open every building in this camp. Our only chance is to fight back hard enough that they decide we are not worth the cost." Kavith stared at her with something like horror. "Fight? Against trained soldiers with superior numbers and weapons? That is suicide." Mira smiled, and it was not a kind smile. "Maybe," she said. "But humans have a saying. If you are gonna die anyway, you might as well make the enemy pay for every breath you take." Outside, Ember howled, and somewhere in the darkness, the raiders hesitated. They had expected easy prey-soft scientists too valuable to damage, too frightened to resist. They had not expected a human. The next 4 minutes were the longest of Myra's life. She moved through the camp like a ghost, darting between buildings as plasma fire lit up the night around her, gathering survivors wherever she found them. Counselor Vorath had taken refuge in the water recycling tank with 2 other Drell researchers, and she had to physically drag him out while he splashed and protested. "We are safe here," he insisted, his amphibious skin flushing with stress colors. "The water will protect us from their weapons. The water will boil when they breach the tank," Mira said coldly, "and then you will cook like fish in a pot move." She found 3 more Kivari frozen in the main research module, 2 human technicians hiding under a workstation, and 1 junior researcher, a young Drell named Thal, who had armed himself with a plasma cutter and was trying to hold off a raider at the back entrance. The raider saw Myra a moment too late. 2 shots sent her mass, and the armored figure crumpled. Thal stared at her with eyes that were far too wide, and Mira grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the supply depot. "Everyone move," she shouted into the broadcasting on all frequencies. "Fall back to the supply depot. It is the most defensible structure in the camp." The supply depot was a reinforced cube of hardened steel and composite armor, designed to survive planetary storms and keep valuable equipment safe. It had only 2 entrances, both of which could be sealed and barricaded, and its walls were thick enough to stop most small arms fire. It was not a fortress, but it was the closest thing they had by the time Mira sealed the main door. She had gathered 9 survivors, 3 Kivari including Kaivev, 3 Drell including Vorath and Thal, 2 human technicians named Roberts and Chun, and herself. Ember slipped through the door at the last moment, pressing against Myra's leg as she engaged the locks. "That creature should not be in here with us," Vorath protested, backing away from the cub. "It is a wild animal. It could turn on us at any moment." "That wild animal is the reason any of us are still alive," Myra snapped. "Its warning gave us time to react, and it has been protecting the Kivari researchers while I gathered everyone else. Show some respect." Ember growled at the Drell, and Vorath fell silent outside. The sounds of the assault had changed. The initial chaos was settling into something more organized, and through the depot's small windows, Myra could see raiders taking up positions around the camp, establishing a perimeter. They were settling in for a siege. "We need to take stock," Myra said, her voice shifting into the calm, commanding tone she had learned in the military. "Roberts, Chun, inventory everything in this depot, weapons especially. Kaivath, see if you can get the backup comm system working. We need to send a distress signal. Thal, you showed courage out there, so you are with me on defense." The young Drell straightened slightly at the praise, his fear giving way to something like determination. "What about the rest of us?" Vorath demanded. "What are we supposed to do while you play soldier?" Mira turned to face him, and something in her expression made the counselor take a step back. "You are supposed to stay out of my way," she said quietly. "Right now I am the only thing standing between you and a slave ship. So unless you have military experience you forgot to mention, I suggest you sit down and let me work." The inventory was not encouraging. 6 plasma pistols, 2 rifles, a handful of stun grenades, and enough ammunition for maybe an hour of sustained firefighting against a full raider crew with air support and superior numbers. It was barely enough to slow them down, but Myra had worked with less. She positioned the researchers at strategic points throughout the depot, gave each of them a weapon and basic instructions, and stationed Ember near the main entrance where its infrared vision could detect approaching threats through the walls. "The cub sees heat?" Thal asked, watching Ember with newfound respect. "Better than any sensor we have," Myra confirmed. "It can detect body heat through at least 30 centimeters of solid material, and its hearing picks up subsonic frequencies we cannot even register if anyone approaches. Ember will know before they reach the door." As if to prove her point, the cub suddenly stiffened, its head turning toward the eastern wall, and let out that low, warning rumble. 3 seconds later, an explosion rocked the building as raiders attempted to breach the secondary entrance. Myra was already moving, rifle raised, and when the door blew inward, she was waiting. The first raider took a bolt to the chest and went down. The second caught a stun grenade that sent it sprawling, and the third retreated before Myra could get a clear shot. "They are testing us," she said, reloading, trying to find weak points. "Thal, cover that breach while I check the other entrance." The young Drell moved without hesitation, his earlier fear replaced by something harder around the depot. The other researchers watched, with expressions that ranged from terror to awe. They had never seen a human in combat before, had only read about humanity's violent past in historical databases and sociology texts. It was one thing to know that humans had evolved as persistent predators, that their species had clawed its way to dominance on a death world through sheer, stubborn refusal to die. It was another thing entirely to watch it happen. "She is not even afraid," Kiveth whispered to Vareth as Myra calmly directed the defense, her voice steady even as plasma fire scorched the walls around her. "How is she not afraid?" The Drell had no answer outside. The raider commander, a scarred Kethver veteran named Drex, watched the depot with growing frustration. He had expected this operation to take 20 minutes at most. A quick smash and grab that would net him a fortune in ransomed scientists. Instead, he had lost 11 soldiers to a single human and her pet monster. "What is she?" one of his lieutenants asked. Nursing a wound from a stun grenade, X did not answer. But he was beginning to understand why the Galactic Union treated humans with such careful respect. They were not just scientists and traders and diplomats. They were something far more dangerous. They were survivors. The siege stretched into its third hour, and Myra could feel exhaustion pulling at the edges of her mind. She had not slept in nearly 20 hours. Had been running on adrenaline and training since Ember first woke her. And the constant tension of waiting for the next attack was wearing her down faster than actual combat would have. But she could not afford to rest. Raiders had settled into a pattern. Probe attacks every 30 to 40 minutes. Each one testing a different part of the depot's defenses. Each one costing them another soldier or two. By Myra's count, they had lost at least 15 fighters now, nearly a third of their initial force. It was not enough. "How long can we hold out?" Dahl asked quietly, crouching beside her at the main entrance. The young Drell had proven himself surprisingly capable over the past hours, following orders without question and showing a steadiness that belied his species. Reputation for panic. Myra checked her ammunition count and did not let her expression change. "As long as we have to," she said. The automated distress beacon was activated before they hit the com tower if it got a signal out. Galactic Union response teams should be on their way, and if it did not, Myra met his eyes. "Then we make them pay so dearly for this station that they think twice before attacking the next one, across the depot." The other survivors had arranged themselves into something resembling a functional unit. Roberts and Chun had taken up positions at the secondary entrance, their aim improving with each attack, while Kaveth had managed to jury-rig a short-range communicator that let them monitor the raiders. Transmissions. Even Voreth had stopped complaining, though he still flinched every time a plasma bolt hit the walls. Ember lay at Myra's feet, its massive head resting on its forepaws, but its eyes never closed. The cub had saved them at least 4 times now, its infrared vision detecting attackers before they could reach the building, its warning growls giving the defenders precious seconds to prepare. "I have never seen anything like this," Kaivis said during a lull in the fighting, her compound eyes fixed on the human woman and her alien companion. "Your species bonds with predators, turns enemies into allies, and then fights alongside them as if it were the most natural thing in the world." "It is natural," Mira said. scratching behind Ember's ears. For us. Anyway, humans spent hundreds of thousands of years living alongside dangerous animals, learning to work with them instead of against them. Wolves became dogs, wildcats became house pets, and we became something more than we could have been alone. But why? The Kivare's voice held genuine confusion. What possible advantage could come from trusting creatures that could kill you? Mira smiled tiredly. Loyalty of wolf might be dangerous, but once it decides you are part of its pack, it will die to protect you. That kind of devotion is worth the risk, at least to humans, as if to prove her point. Ember lifted its head and licked Myra's face. And for just a moment the exhaustion and fear faded away, then the cub's stripes flashed red. And Mira was on her feet with her weapon raised before she consciously registered the warning. Movement at the eastern perimeter. She called out, "Everyone to positions." But this time, the attack did not come. Instead, a voice crackled through the depot speakers. The raiders had patched into their short-range comm. "Attention. Research station," the voice said, heavily accented but understandable. "This is Commander Drex of the Kethver Acquisition Fleet. I wish to negotiate." Mira gestured for silence and keyed the communicator. "I am listening. You have cost me many soldiers tonight. Human more than this station is worth in ransom. I am prepared to offer terms." "What kind of terms?" There was a pause, and when Drex spoke again, his voice was careful. "Surrender yourself and the creature you call Ember, and I will release the other researchers unharmed. My ships will leave this world and never return." Behind Myra, Vorath's eyes lit up with desperate hope. She could feel his gaze on her back, could practically hear him calculating the odds: 1 human and 1 animal in exchange for 9 lives, by pure mathematics. It made sense, but humans did not think in pure mathematics. "Counter-offer," Myra said, her voice flat. "Take your remaining soldiers. Get back on your ships and leave this system immediately. If you do, I will let you go without pursuit." Drex laughed, a harsh barking sound. "You are in no position to make demands. Human, you are outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of time." "Maybe," Myra agreed. "But every minute you spend here is a minute closer to the Galactic Union response fleet arriving, and every soldier you lose trying to breach this depot is 1 less soldier you have for your next raid. Ask yourself, Commander, is this really worth the cost?" Silence stretched across the comm line. "I will give you 5 minutes to reconsider," Drex said finally. And the channel went dead. The moment the transmission ended, Vorath stepped forward. "You should take the deal. 1 life against 9 is simple arithmetic, and the creature is not even sentient. There is no logical reason to no." The word cut through the depot like a blade, and Vorath fell silent. Mira turned to face the Drell, and her eyes were hard as steel. "I do not trade my own," she said quietly. "Not for anything, not ever, and Ember is mine now. Which means anyone who wants to take her goes through me first. But the logic is what prey uses to justify abandoning its weakest members." Myra interrupted. "Humans are not prey, Counselor. We are the species that domesticated wolves and rode horses into battle and turned the most dangerous predators on our world into our best friends. We do not surrender. We do not negotiate from weakness. And we absolutely do not give up our pack." She turned back to the window, raised her rifle, and shot out the external floodlight directly above where she estimated Drex was standing in the sudden darkness. Ember howled, a sound that echoed across the ruined camp like a declaration of war, and somewhere in the night, a raider commander began to understand that he had made a terrible mistake. The final assault came at hour 5, and it came with everything Drex had left. 3 breach teams hit the depot simultaneously, blasting through walls that had held firm through a dozen smaller attacks. Pouring into the building with the desperate fury of soldiers who knew their time was running out, Myra met them with fire and blood, She moved through the chaos, like something out of a nightmare. Her rifle spitting death in controlled bursts. Her voice cutting through the noise with commands that the other defenders followed without thinking. Thal covered her left flank, his earlier fear transformed into something fierce and determined. While Roberts and Chun held the secondary entrance against a wave of attackers that seemed endless ember. Fought beside her, the cub was a blur of teeth and claws and venomous spines, taking down raiders with a savagery that made even Mira pause. It was not the same creature that had licked her face an hour ago. Not the gentle animal that slept outside her door. This was a Varadi apex predator in its element. And for the first time, the other researchers understood why the Galactic Union had classified the species as one of the most dangerous in known space. But even with Ember's help, they were losing. The depot was too large to defend with so few people. And the raiders were learning to avoid the cub's infrared detection by using thermal dampeners. One by one, the defensive positions fell, and Myra found herself retreating toward the center of the building with a handful of wounded survivors. "We cannot hold," Kavith shouted, her voice cracking with panic. "There are too many of them." "Then we make our stand here," Myra said, reloading her rifle with hands that did not shake. "Everyone get behind the supply crates. We form a circle, and we do not stop fighting until we are dead or they are." It was not a plan so much as a final act of defiance. A refusal to surrender. Even when surrender was the only logical option, the raiders closed in, sensing victory. And Drex himself stepped through the ruined wall with his weapon raised. "Enough," the commander said, his scarred face twisted with grudging respect. "You have fought well, human better than any prey I have ever hunted. Surrender now, and I will make your death quick." Mira raised her rifle. "Come and take me." Drex smiled and raised his own weapon, and then the sky exploded. The first Galactic Union dropship came down like the fist of an angry god, its weapon systems lighting up the night as it tore through the raiders' remaining air support. 2 more followed, then 4, then a dozen. And suddenly, the camp was filled with armored response troops, pouring out of assault vehicles with weapons that made the raiders' equipment look like children's toys. Drex had perhaps 2 seconds to realize that his entire operation had just been reduced to ash before a stun bolt caught him in the chest and dropped him to the ground. The siege was over in the aftermath. Mira sat on a pile of broken crates in the ruins of the supply depot, field dressing a wound on her arm while Ember tried to lick her face. The cub was covered in blood, some of it raider, some of it its own, but its bioluminescent stripes had finally faded back to the calm orange of contentment around her. The survivors were being treated by Union medics and debriefed by security officers. She could hear Voreth giving his account of the attack, and she noticed with grim amusement that the Drell was carefully editing out the parts where he had suggested surrendering her to the enemy. "Dr. Vance?" She looked up to find a Union captain standing over her, his expression a mixture of respect and disbelief. "Ma'am, I have to say, in 30 years of service, I have never seen anything like this." 9 researchers held off a full Kethver raiding party for 6 hours with minimal weapons and no military support. "We had help," Myra said. Nodding toward Ember, the captain's eyes widened. "That thing helped you?" "I thought Varadi were classified as hostile fauna. Reclassification pending," Myra said with a tired smile. "Turns out they make excellent guard dogs once you earn their trust." The captain shook his head slowly. "Only humans. Every other species in the Union would have negotiated, hidden, or died. But you lot just decided to fight a war with a handful of researchers and a pet predator. I do not know whether to be impressed or terrified." "Why not both?" Myra suggested a week later. Myra submitted her official report to the Galactic Union Xenobiology Council. In it, she detailed everything she had learned about Varadi behavioral patterns, social bonding, and threat detection capabilities. She argued that the species had been fundamentally misunderstood, that their aggression was defensive rather than predatory, and that with proper handling, they could become invaluable allies. Rather than dangerous obstacles, she also recommended that Ember be redesignated from hostile specimen to bonded companion, with all the legal protections that status entailed. The report caused a scandal. The Kivari called it sentimental and unscientific. The Drell called it reckless and dangerous. 3 separate union committees demanded hearings to discuss the human tendency toward irrational interspecies attachment. But the humans, the traders and soldiers and diplomats who had spread across 300 worlds in less than 4 centuries read the report and smiled because they understood something the other species never would. The universe was vast and cold and full of dangers, and the only way to survive it was to find allies wherever you could, even in the most unlikely places. Even among the predators that everyone else feared, humans had learned that lesson long ago. On a little blue world where they had looked at wolves and seen friends, and now on 100 other worlds, other humans were looking at other creatures and seeing the same thing. Mira returned to Varath Prime 6 months later as the director of the first official human variety bonding program. Ember, now fully grown, still limping, still sleeping outside her door, was designated as the program's first success story on the night of her return. Mira stood at the edge of the rebuilt camp and watched the alien forest shift and breathe in the purple twilight. Beside her, Ember pressed close, its stripes pulsing warm orange. "We did it," Myra said softly. "We showed them what we could be together." The cub rumbled in response, and somewhere in the distance, a wild variety pack howled at the rising moons for the first time in recorded history. Another howl answered, not from the forest, but from the camp Ember, calling out to its own kind with a voice that said, "There is another way, and across the galaxy." Other species listened and wondered what it was about humans that made them reach out to the things that could kill them. The answer, Myra knew, was simple: humans were never content to be alone, and they would cross any boundary, tame any predator, and defy any odds to find someone to stand beside them in the dark. That was what it meant to be human, and it was the most dangerous thing in the universe.